In our headlines for this Thursday afternoon, February 2nd. The U.S. Federal Reserve marks its 8th straight session of rate hikes since last March to continue, albeit at a slower pace, its campaign against inflation. North Korea denounced the security efforts, including military drills by the U.S. and South Korea, claiming they're raising tensions to an extreme red line. And despite the sluggish smartphone market, Samsung has unpacked its latest Galaxy S23 lineup that boasts a powerful battery, camera and processor. U.S. central bank authorities have announced a 25 basis point hike in their latest rate decision aimed at curbing inflation. Our Shin Se-bok starts us off.
The Federal Reserve has once again slowed its target interest rate increase as it raised policy rates by 0.25 percentage point on Wednesday. But it hinted at further hikes to come.
Today, the FOMC raised our policy interest rate by 25 basis points. We continue to anticipate that ongoing increases will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time.
The baby step hike matches market expectations. Last year alone, the Fed increased policy rates 7 times, making it the fastest increase since the 1980s. Accordingly, the U.S. benchmark interest rate jumped to a range of 4.5 to 4.75%. The Fed's latest decision comes amid 2 encouraging wage growth and inflation trends in the U.S. late last year, after inflation soared to 9.1% in June, a level not seen in over 40 years. After taking 4 consecutive giant steps of 75 basis point rate hikes from June to November last year, the Fed slowed the pace to 50 last month. Still, Fed officials signaled there's still a long way to combat inflation.
While recent developments are encouraging, we will need substantially more evidence to be confident that inflation is on a sustained downward path.
The latest statement assessed the current inflation situation as eased but still elevated. Powell also warned that the job is not fully done, as he said he doesn't expect rate cuts this year. As for the interest rate gap between South Korea and the United States, with Wednesday's announcement, the interest rate gap between the two countries widened to as much as 1.25 percentage points, the widest since October 2000. South Korea's interest rates had been higher than the U.S. from early 2020 until July last year. Since then, South Korea has steadily hiked key interest rates, but watchers point out that the rate is still far too low. Lower interest rates could result in a loss of investors to overseas markets, as well as a depreciating currency, eventually making inflation worse. Meanwhile, to reach the Fed's terminal rate of 5.1% for 2023, it is widely expected that the Fed will take at least 2 more baby steps this year. Shin Se-bok, Arirang News.
And in related news, Seoul's top finance official says the Fed's latest rate decision will serve to calm global market jitters. He nonetheless underscored the presence of variables. Our finance ministry correspondent Lee Dae-hyun reports.
South Korea sees the U.S. Fed's overnight rate hike decision as easing uncertainty in the global financial market. The sentiment was expressed in a meeting held by Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho Thursday, hours after the Federal Reserve raised its benchmark rate by 25 basis points. In the meeting, the minister said the domestic market, too, is showing less volatility thanks to efforts made by the government over the past month.
The government's efforts to stabilize the market are now showing results. In January, the country saw strong growth in the stock market compared to other major countries. The dollar weakened against the won and government bond rates are significantly dropping.
However, he stressed that the government will continue to closely monitor the market as exports remain sluggish and high consumer prices are expected to stay for a while, causing more practical difficulties. Chu said the ministry is looking to find the right mix of monetary and fiscal policy, as well as the right time to implement it. It aims to expand bonds for companies with low credit scores to further stabilize the market and alleviate capital shortages for small businesses. And to ease the financial burden, 10 trillion won or $8.2 billion will be invested to provide low interest rate loans for small business owners. Efforts to ease real estate loan restrictions were also pledged during the meeting. Meanwhile, the Bank of Korea earlier on Thursday also discussed how the Fed's decision will affect the domestic market. The BOK Senior Deputy Governor Lee Seung-hun said that due to a gap in how the Fed and the markets are viewing inflation and corrective measures, global financial volatility still remains. With this in mind, he pledged to monitor exchange rates and capital flow and implement measures to stabilize the market. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Consumer prices in January posted their highest jump on year since last October. Statistics Korea says they surged 5.2% from the year prior. Now that's up 0.2 percentage points from December. And it's also the 9th month in a row that the annual rate has been hovering above the 5% mark. The latest surge has been linked to utility bills, which rose over 28% on year, the largest rise on record. Pundits are also pointing to the cold weather, which raised the prices of agricultural, fisheries and livestock products by 1.1% on year. Smartphone sales are sluggish worldwide, but Samsung is seeking to turn the tide around with its latest Galaxy S23 series, which promise powerful batteries, cameras and processors. My colleague Kim Hyun-sung has a glimpse.
Samsung has just unveiled its first flagship phones of 2023, the Galaxy S23 series. The trio, the S23, the S23 Plus, and the S23 Ultra, compact with better camera features and gaming capabilities. The front camera has been upgraded from 10 megapixels to 12 megapixels. Battery capacity gets a boost to 5,000 milliamperes per hour, which can comfortably last throughout the day with moderate usage. And the 23 series comes equipped with a powerful processor, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which according to Samsung has a 40% increased performance compared to its predecessor. This is last year's flagship phone, the Galaxy S22. In the new Galaxy S23 series, Samsung has also gotten rid of this backside contour cut for its cameras, giving the phone a more stylish look. Perhaps one of the most impressive features are the S23 Ultra's 200 megapixel cameras. They have almost doubled the megapixels of last year's model and promise more detailed and clear nighttime photography. The Astro Hyperlapse function on the S23 Ultra allows users to take time-lapse photographs of stars without any special gadgets. The S23 series are also the first smartphones on the market to use Gorilla Glass Victus 2, making them more durable against drops and everyday wear and tear. However, some found first impressions to be underwhelming. Some online gadget reviewers called it a minor upgrade from the S22. But an expert says that people will be able to feel the impressive horsepower of the S23 series when using the phones.
S23 is the I think best phone in the world right now, I think. In terms of experience, people can feel, wow, that's a lot much better.
The S23 also may not receive as much fanfare as usual due to tough economic times. Consumers have lost their appetite for new smartphones and semiconductor goods. Global smartphone shipments dipped almost 1/5 on year in the last quarter of 2022. Samsung also earlier this week reported an earnings shock, an on-year plunge of 97% in operating profit from its semiconductor division in the last quarter. Facing these challenges, the S23 series will hit the shelves worldwide on February 17th. Pre-orders in South Korea start on the 7th of February. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, there's been a fresh presidential vote of support for the country's chipmakers that industry insiders are welcoming, especially amid the lackluster global demand. Our top office correspondent Moon Gon-young has more.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has pledged all-out efforts to help Korean chip manufacturers overcome the current down cycle, as semiconductors are, quote, the nation's security asset that underpins the economy. At a signing ceremony Wednesday marking SK Siltron's nearly $1 billion in planned investment to install new silicon wafer production facilities in the nation's southeastern city of Gumi, President Yoon vowed to spare no assistance for companies making bold and preemptive investments.
반도체 산업은 우리 수출의 20%를 담당하는 경제의 버팀목이자 국가 안보 자산입니다. 소재나 부품, 장비 국산화를 위해 더욱 힘을 써야 하고 또 메모리 가격의 하락세, 경기 침체에 따른 수요 약화에도 선제적으로 대응해야 합니다.
Yoon called for more investment, adding competitors across the world continue to pose threats to South Korea's chip industry by employing export restrictions, subsidies, tax benefits, and other measures. His remarks come as the nation's major chip makers suffered disappointing earnings in the fourth quarter of last year amid a global downturn in the semiconductor industry. Earlier in the day, the South Korean leader stopped by Kumho National Institute of Technology in Gumi, where he stressed the importance of training semiconductor experts.
우리가 어려운 여건 속에서도 산업화에 성공하고 이런 경제 대국으로 성장할 수 있었던 것은 결국 우리는 사람에 투자하고 사람을 양성했기 때문입니다. 특히 지금 이 4차 산업혁명과 글로벌 기술 패권 경쟁 속에서 국가가 살아남는 길은 오로지 뛰어난 과학기술 인재들을 많이 길러내는 것입니다.
You noted that the institute was established under former President Park Chung-hee's initiative to create and nurture the country's science human resources pool in the 1970s. Park Chung-hee is credited with leading the nation's economic growth in the 60s and 70s, which reshaped and modernized South Korea, but has also been criticized for his authoritarian way of ruling the country for 18 years. He's also the father of ex-President Park Geun-hye, who was ousted in 2017 due to a corruption scandal. Moon Gon-young, Arirang News.
Foreign Minister Park Jin says UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres believes a nuclear test by North Korea would be a, quote, devastating blow to world peace. Speaking to reporters after related talks at the UN headquarters in New York on Wednesday, Park added the UN chief has extended his full support to Seoul's efforts to ensure peace on the Korean peninsula. Separately, Park also met with the ambassadors of member states of the UN Security Council and called for a strong, unified response to North Korea's blatant violations of UN resolutions. He also asked for support for Seoul's bid for a seat as a non-permanent member of the Council for the 2024 to 2025 term. Pyongyang has strongly condemned the latest security-related efforts by Washington and Seoul, adding they threaten to turn the Korean peninsula into a battlefield. Our foreign affairs correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
North Korea has warned that it will use the toughest measures in response to military provocations by Washington. According to state-run media on Thursday, the North's foreign ministry spokesperson said the regime will respond with, quote, a nuclear for nuclear, a confrontation for a confrontation mindset. The remarks come as U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin pledged to deploy more American strategic assets to the Korean peninsula during his visit to Seoul earlier in the week. The North spokesperson warned that Washington's risky intentions will only turn the Korean peninsula into a more dangerous war zone, and added the regime's nuclear capabilities are ready to counter any challenges now and in the future. Pyongyang also made clear that it has no interest in engaging in dialogue as long as Washington keeps its hardline stance. North Korea's warning comes after South Korea and the U.S. conducted this year's first combined air training exercises. Seoul's defense ministry confirmed Thursday that the two allies had conducted the drill the day before. It featured South Korea's F-35A fighters, US B-1B strategic bombers, along with F-22 and F-35B fighter jets. The drills show Washington's will to strengthen extended deterrence, which is the U.S. policy of defending its allies that come under conventional or nuclear attack. The ministry added that the training also shows the allies' determination to keep South Koreans safe from any provocations from the regime. Seoul and Washington plan to bolster joint air exercises with further deployments of advanced military assets from the U.S. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., adamant calls for police reform are mounting amid the funeral of a black man who was brutally beaten to death by officers on duty. Our Yoon covers this tragic event.
29-year-old Tyre Nichols took his last breath on January 10th, 3 days after he was brutally beaten by 5 officers at a traffic light. The beating, the latest incident of police brutality against Black Americans, occurred despite U.S. cities pledging to strengthen use-of-force policies after the death of George Floyd in 2020. Those policies include the use of a necessary amount of force. However, they also make it the duty of an officer to intervene when a fellow officer engages in dangerous conduct. A memorial service was held in Memphis on Wednesday for Nichols, roughly 3 weeks after his death. In those 3 weeks, 5 officers have been fired and charged with his murder. During the service, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and civil rights activist Reverend Al Sharpton both delivered words of mourning and support, as well as impassioned speeches calling on Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act.
This violent act was not in pursuit of public safety. It was not in the interest of keeping the public safe, because one must ask, was not it in the interest of keeping the public safe that Tyre Nichols would be with us here today?
Some of us believe in the dream has to come true. Some of us are going to fight until we make this legislation happen. I don't know when, I don't know how, but we won't stop until we hold you accountable and change the system.
Sharpton also added that he believed the officers wouldn't have beaten Nichols in the same way had he been white, raising the issue of race. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed the Democratic-controlled House in March of 2021, but broke down soon after in the Senate. Calls are growing louder for the revival of the act, which broadly covers a variety of police reforms, including increasing the use of body cameras, creating a national registry for officers disciplined for misconduct, as well as a ban on no-knock warrants. Meanwhile, more U.S. cities are being encouraged to strengthen their use-of-force policies and ensure their police forces refocus on their mission to ensure public safety. 이은진, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, over in Europe, having mastered tangible support for defense activities on land, Ukraine has renewed its calls for support in the air to further bolster its counter-strategy against Russian assault. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
During a trip to Paris, Ukraine Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov asked France for further support, asking for fighter jets that his country needs. According to Defense Chief, tactical aircrafts are a crucial part of any country's air defense system, and the same holds true for Ukraine. He remained optimistic that soon enough, countries will begin sending fighter jets to Ukraine to use in the fight against Russia, with Reznikov mentioning that the request for tank support, like the German-made Leopard 2, was initially rejected before later being approved. While talks between the defense chiefs of Ukraine and France ended without any conclusion on fighter jet support, Paris agreed it will send 12 additional Caesar howitzers and has discussed training Ukrainian pilots to fly French fighter jets as part of military assistance to Kyiv. France also agreed to provide radar capable of detecting enemy aircraft at a distance of 250 kilometers. Meanwhile, according to officials in Washington, the U.S. is preparing to offer Kyiv a $2.2 billion military aid package, which is expected to include medium-range rockets. The U.S. Congress has approved more than $110 billion in aid since the war began last February. In addition, the European Union will increase the number of Ukrainian troops it aims to train to 30,000 as it looks to continue its support for Ukraine's fight against Russia. The latest figure is double the 15,000 troops the bloc had initially promised in November 2022. The plan will be announced officially at an UN-Ukraine summit in Kyiv on Friday, as European allies continue to step up their military support for Ukraine. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Myanmar, the military junta have extended the country's state of emergency by a further 6 months. The announcement was made on Wednesday local time on the 2-year anniversary of the military coup. It means that the junta can continue to control all government functions, including the legislative, judicial, and executive powers. In a state broadcast, junta leader General Min Aung Hlaing said the extension was necessary as unusual circumstances in the country remain. He also said more time is needed to prepare for a peaceful and stable election. Elections cannot be held in Myanmar during a state of emergency. Although no new date for elections has been given, Hlaing hinted that they could take place in August. But watchers have expressed doubts over the legitimacy of elections, saying they would likely favor the military staying in power. Turning over to the Australian outback now, where a radioactive capsule that had been missing for 2 weeks has been found. The 8mm by 6mm capsule was located south of the town of Newman on the side of the road after a search that spanned 1,400 kilometers of roadway. The find was described as akin to locating a needle in a haystack. The coin-sized capsule was lost after it fell from a truck that was travelling to Perth from a mine site in Western Australia. According to authorities, the cesium-137 capsule, used in radiation gauges for the mining industry, could have posed a significant public health risk, as it's capable of causing skin damage, burns, or radiation sickness. Now, the world's oldest professional football player, Kazuyoshi Miura of Japan, is set to continue his 37-year-long career in Portugal. The 55-year-old has signed for the Portuguese second division team, Oliveirense, on loan from Japanese side Yokohama FC. King Kazu, as he is often called, will turn 56 later this month, but the forward is showing no signs of slowing down. He has previously said that he plans to retire from football at the age of 60. Miura began his professional career in 1986 with Brazilian side Santos. He spent most of his career in Japan, but has also played for clubs in Italy, Croatia, and Australia. Miura has also scored 55 goals in 89 matches for Japan's national team. And finally, Scotland's Shetland Islands are saying goodbye to the Yule with their annual Viking Fire Festival. Called Up Helliar, the over 140-year-old festival traditionally takes place from January to March across Shetland's various communities. And in the region's biggest town of Lerwick on Tuesday, 1,000 participants called geysers dressed in Viking gear and marched in procession to celebrate their Norse heritage. This year saw women being allowed to participate for the first time, after a previous ban was lifted following decades-long efforts to be included. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We had a bitterly cold start to the day with more regions under cold wave alerts. And afternoon highs are also 2 to 6 degrees lower than yesterday, hovering right around these seasonal norms. Biting winds are making it feel much colder than what this thermometer says, about 1 to 4 degrees lower, so please dress in layers. We are seeing mostly sunny skies with improved air quality. Meanwhile, Ulleungdo and Dokdo will see a mix of rain and snow letting up shortly. East Coast regions, though, really need some precipitation as the dry weather alerts have been in place for 2 consecutive weeks now. Fire safety is a must, and be sure to apply a good amount of moisturizer and drink plenty of water to stay hydrated. The weather looks uneventful with a gradual warming trend, with Saturday already marking Ipchun, the start of spring on traditional calendar. But the skies will remain fairly bright with no precipitation in the forecast for East Coast regions. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
Well, those are the headlines at this hour, but do stay with us for our panel session coming up right after this break. Thank you for now.